Since you're the responsible one, you can fix your sister's mistake. That's what family does. My father didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the advisors. That detail mattered. The chandelier light reflected off polished oak. Silverware rested precisely against porcelain. A glass touched the table a little too hard somewhere near the center. The air conditioner hummed softly above the vent behind my chair. Anniversary dinner. 40 guests earlier in the evening. Now just immediate family and 2 senior advisors lingering over dessert. He didn't say fraud. He said mistake. He didn't say 3 investor deposits moved through an undisclosed LLC. He said the funds had been temporarily structured differently. And she understands responsibility, he continued, gesturing toward me with his wine glass. Unlike her sister, she thinks long-term. A few quiet laughs. Measured. Polite. Contained. My sister kept her eyes lowered. My mother adjusted the edge of her napkin, as if smoothing fabric could steady the room. He was framing a solution publicly. Assigning liability socially. Transferring pressure without naming it. He expected agreement. He expected compliance. He expected me to absorb the correction quietly the way I always had. I didn't respond. I noticed condensation sliding down my water glass instead. What he didn't know, what no one at the table knew, was that the correction had already been processed. And by the time dessert was cleared, the structure beneath him had shifted. There's a particular role that families assign without announcing it. The dependable one. The calm one. The one who doesn't escalate. You become the bridge between personalities. The translator between impulse and consequence. The one who absorbs tension so everyone else can remain comfortable. Over time, that role hardens. It stops being appreciation. It becomes expectation. I was never excluded from decision-making. I was included where the work was invisible. Compliance reports. Vendor reconciliations. Audit preparation. Insurance renewals. My sister handled expansion meetings. Investor dinners. Press photos. I handled the systems that kept those photographs possible. Have you ever realized that the more composed you are, the more likely people are to hand you what they don't want to carry? If you recognize that dynamic, you can subscribe. This channel tends to speak to people who understand quiet leverage. And if you've ever been labeled the responsible one when something inconvenient appears, you can share that experience below. Because tonight wasn't just about responsibility. It was about authority. And authority had already moved. My father built the company from a single renovation contract. That origin story is repeated at every formal dinner. He worked nights. He mortgaged the house once. He survived 2 recessions. He sits at the head of the table not because he insists, but because no one imagines another arrangement. My mother manages internal cohesion. She keeps communication smooth. She protects image. My sister represents forward motion. She speaks confidently about growth projections. She understands how to excite investors. I maintain governance, which means I read what others skim. When bylaws were updated, I tracked revisions. When we converted from a partnership into a structured corporation, I organized the compliance transition. When expansion created subsidiary entities, I reviewed disclosure requirements. There were patterns. When I corrected exposure risk in a contract, it was called diligence. When my sister closed a development deal, it was called vision. Neither description was wrong, but one was celebrated publicly. The other was expected privately. Over time, reliability becomes mistaken for permanence. They assumed compliance was permanent. Reliability grants access. System permissions accumulate quietly. Bank dashboards. Digital vaults. Secretary of State portals. Insurance certificates. Board voting archives. It appears clerical. It isn't. Access reveals structure. And structure contains dormant clauses most people forget exist. When we restructured 3 years ago, I flagged a section regarding undisclosed financial vehicles interacting with corporate accounts. It required automatic review. Temporary suspension of independent signatory authority. Board vote activation. Everyone agreed it was standard protection language. No one expected to use it. Expansion accelerated after that. Autonomy increased for project accounts. But the protective clause remained untouched. Because no one revisits what appears theoretical. Until it isn't. The bank didn't call dramatically. It was procedural. 3 investor deposits had moved through an LLC not listed in our disclosures. The explanation internally was efficiency. But governance language doesn't interpret tone. It interprets disclosure. I reviewed documentation history. No written notice. No board acknowledgement. which meant the protective clause activated automatically. I scheduled the review. There was mild frustration. Language about flexibility. About trust. About not overreacting. I asked one question. Was the entity disclosed in writing to the board? Silence. Silence triggers mechanism. The advisors supported review. The board voted. Temporary suspension of independent signatory authority passed without drama. My father abstained, considering it administrative routine. Authority transferred to the Chief Compliance Officer pending audit clarification. That position was mine. No announcement followed. Just digital confirmation. Updated permissions. Redirected authorizations. By the time we gathered for dinner, the shift was already recorded. The audience knew something was moving. The table did not. Back at the table, my father continued speaking about legacy. Leadership, he said, means correcting errors without panic. He described steady hands. Experience. Responsibility. Then he returned to me. She'll handle it. There it was again. Public assignment. Private assumption. He believed he was reinforcing hierarchy. The advisors nodded slightly, expecting reassurance. He concluded his remarks. And unless anyone wants to add something. Pause. The room turned toward me. This is the moment most people imagine involves a speech. It didn't. I set my fork down. I'd like to clarify the current status. Calm. Measured. The expansion account triggered a compliance review under our corporate bylaws last week. The advisors straightened slightly. The board voted to suspend independent signatory authority pending audit confirmation. That suspension is active. My father's expression adjusted, but subtly. Until review concludes, all transactions require compliance authorization. A beat. That authority currently rests with my office. No accusation. No emphasis. Just fact. I've notified the bank and initiated documentation safeguards. There is no immediate exposure risk. Silence spread outward. Not explosive. Structural. An advisor lowered his glass slowly. Phones emerged discreetly. One advisor reopened the governance resolution. My sister inhaled carefully but said nothing. My mother's eyes moved between us. This is temporary, my father said. Yes, I replied. Temporary doesn't mean insignificant. Questions shifted direction. What's the audit timeline? What documentation is pending? They were directed to me. The hierarchy didn't collapse. It adjusted. An adjustment is often more unsettling than confrontation. He asked me into his office once guests began leaving. The door closed softly. You could have handled that privately. I followed the governance timeline. This is family. It's also fiduciary structure. He studied me differently, not as the reliable daughter, as the current authorization point. You understand this suspension affects operations. Yes. And you're comfortable centralizing approvals. It centralizes automatically. Dependency reveals itself when access narrows. He nodded once. Carefully. We'll review everything tomorrow. I'll prepare the audit summary. That night, confirmations finalized. Authorization flows rerouted. Vendor portals updated. Bank compliance notified under existing protective policy. No alarms triggered. Just formal acknowledgement. By morning, inquiries redirected. Advisors called for clarification. The bank requested updated documentation reflecting active review status. A vendor asked which office should confirm pending transfers. The answer was consistent. Compliance. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just consistently. Before leaving the house, I walked once more through the dining room. Candles nearly extinguished. Dessert plates untouched at one end. My father speaking quietly on the phone in the hallway. Measured tone. Controlled pacing. I placed my chair fully beneath the table. Picked up my coat. Stepped outside. Closed the door gently. I didn't need the microphone. Authority often confuses visibility with control. The head of the table. The final toast. The public assignment of responsibility. But governance lives elsewhere. In documentation. In dormant clauses. In votes recorded without applause. For years, I was underestimated because I didn't compete for narrative space. That created proximity to structure. When the moment arrived, nothing dramatic occurred. No shouting. No rupture. Just phones ringing the next morning. Questions redirected. Access redefined. Control doesn't argue. It updates the record.